Well, tonight we're talking about Justin Martyr, and I'm going to do something that I often don't do, or I should say I've done rarely in using Zoom. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint screen, but then I'm going to have to toggle out and share. I would like us to look at whole chapters in a couple of instances with Jim. Are you laughing at me?
No, I'm laughing at my wife.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Isn't today Glenna's birthday?
Yes,
Yes,
it
it
is.
is.
Happy birthday, Glenna.
All right, Glenna, I promised you I
Thank
wouldn't
you.
say anything, but I can't speak for Joni.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
okay.
So I'm sorry. So the technology, I'd like to show the whole chapter. I've pulled out bits of a number of chapters, but in 2 or 3 cases, I'd like us to be able to see the whole chapter. And so I'm going to try to share that screen as well as my usual PowerPoint. So as I'm toggling back and forth at certain points, and you all know how adept I am at this stuff. So anyway, let's start with and how did I get on that screen? That's not where I was. Here's where I wanted to be. Okay.
I know it.
A little bit of background on Justin Martyr very quickly. You can see his dates there. He was born around 100, died in 165 as a martyr. That's why he's called Justin Martyr. So he's also known as Justin the philosopher, and that's actually a significant factor in our thinking about Justin's, the way he writes, the subjects he is interested in, the way he wrote this apology. The apology that he wrote, there are 2 parts actually, and so this is the first part. The word apology does not mean what we normally use for the word, right? Apology. It's a Greek word which means to defend, a reasoned defense. And in this case, he's defending the Christian faith. So apologetics is a field of study and practice in the Christian church that is an attempt to defend or explain the faith, the doctrines, the teachings, the ethics in a rational way, in an understandable way. So Justin was kind of the first to undertake that work. This treatise that we're reading tonight is probably written around 156 AD, right on the tail or right behind Polycarp's martyrdom. So here I would like us to pause for a second and try to imagine the Mediterranean world. We do not have systematic persecution of Christians. What we have are pockets of suspicion and persecution. And so it's not a big number, but it's a significant number of leaders of churches or prominent members of churches who have been martyred. So if we could imagine living in an environment where we're going to work, we're walking down the street, we know that being a Christian is not only not popular, but it also brings out the suspicion, hostility, and sometimes state attention. And the state often went after bishops or other prominent people in the church to try to squelch the movement. And here is Justin, who gave his life as a martyr, writing to the emperor. And he doesn't really mince any words, and I'm going to try to show that tonight. So a question that always comes to my mind when I'm reading these things has to do with their courage. They knew the risks they were living with. And the courage, of course, is rooted in God's grace. It's not just that they're super courageous people. It's God's grace strengthening them. It's their utter conviction of the reality of the resurrection of the body from the dead, the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. And they were very confident that death, dying at the hand of an emperor was not the final thing. So they did not fear this power. And I just think that's good for us to remember. You also know, if you read even the chapters that I asked you to read, there's a strong philosophical slant to this apology. And I'm quoting now from chapter 2. And I'm asking us to look at the language. Reason directs those who are truly pious and philosophical to honor and love only what is true. This is very much the mindset of a philosopher. For we have come not to flatter you by this writing, you, Mr. Emperor, and the other people around you that are going to read this apology, not to flatter you by this writing, but to beg that you pass judgment after a searching and accurate investigation. So these Christians have come under a lot of suspicion and hostility, and Justin is writing on behalf of the church. We're in Rome, so Justin is in Rome. He's writing to the Roman emperor, and so on. Any questions or observations, please just speak up. And here's an example of...
I have a question, Stephen. Was it common for people to write letters to the emperor?
Very good question. No, it was not common. And this tells us something about Justin. So Justin, I think I have a slide for this. I'm sorry. I may be getting ahead of myself, but Justin grew up in Samaria, in what is now known as Nablus or Nablus. And he was of a Greek family and perhaps some Romans. And it's possible that his family was of the diplomatic class. And so quite likely Justin was accustomed to having a certain status. And so he felt authorized, shall I say, qualified to write to the emperor. But no, it would have been uncommon for people to write to the emperor. But it is the case that people could appeal to the emperor, that certain kinds of legal cases could wind up being judged by the emperor. So in that sense, it is different than, say, the president of the United States. We could never appeal to the president and get anywhere. But in the way the legal system was set up in Rome, you could appeal to the emperor, and there's a chance you could get a hearing. Okay, from chapter 3, Justin says this: we demand that the charges against the Christians be investigated, and that if these be substantiated, they be punished as they deserve. Now, a part that I didn't include, but he says parenthetically, or we will punish them, right? So there's a kind of an awareness of the discipline within the church going on. But if no one can convict us of anything, notice the kind of philosophical coloring here. True reason forbids you, for the sake of a wicked rumor, to wrong blameless men. So he's very straightforward in his rhetoric directed at the emperor. All right, since we can't read the whole thing really, let me there we go. Let me try to summarize what we have not read. These are some of the themes you would discover if you did read the whole apology. He operates from the assumption that Moses and the law came before the Greek myths. So if we think of Homer, for example, that's around 700 years before Christ. And then, from kind of, that's the earliest, and from that point on, so we get all these other myths, and then we get into the philosophies of the 5th and 4th and 3rd centuries. And so this was a fairly common viewpoint among leaders of the church. They had gotten the idea somehow that Plato had read Moses. And this view that Justin has here assumes that the law, we have the law, like 1,000 years before Christ. So the law is in place before Homer and the Greek myths all take place. Now, modern scholars have a different view of this generally. But again, it takes a little bit of thinking and clarifying and qualification here. The law that we now have in the scriptures, in the canon, most scholars believe was compiled during the Babylonian captivity. And so prior to the Babylonian captivity, you have writings, you have, shall I say, bits and pieces, not all together, but still out there. So I think it's fair to imagine that Justin understands that any kind of access that Plato would have had to the Jewish law, which really would have been possible, is that maybe Plato read Moses. Anyway, not to belabor that point, Moses and the law came before the Greek myths. Now, this is important to Justin because antiquity, the longer something's been around, the more weight you give it to. So that's an important thing to keep in
Of course,
mind.
modern scholars don't agree.
Right. Again, this is a different way of thinking. And that's a bias of modern scholarship, right? In many ways, we do rely on older and older. The older it is, the better it is, that sort of thing. Anyway, also, he's arguing that, secondly, it's not only is the law ancient, but also Moses predicted Christ. And here we would look at Genesis 49:10. Joni, would you have it? Oh, you don't. Joanne?
Mhm.
Would you please?
Sure.
Okay, this says, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and obedience of the nation shall be his.
Right. So this is one of a number of examples of how very early in the Christian church, reading the scriptures, which originally would have been the Old Testament, they're now understanding these scriptures through Christ. And so that scepter not departing from Judah, of course, Justin sees as fulfilled in Christ. Therefore, Moses predicted Christ. Now the question would become, did Moses, assuming that he did, he compiled, he collected these ancient documents, and we get under Moses' hand the first shaping of the law, shall I say. Did Moses have a vision of Jesus of Nazareth in his mind? No, we don't think so. But Moses could very well have had a vision of one who is to come, that then Jesus is that one who is to come. Okay, so that's another thing that Justin spends some time unpacking for the emperor. Going on, the Old Testament prophets predicted Christ. And this is where, if you think about the Advent scriptures, from Micah about Bethlehem, from Isaiah about the shoot springing from the stump of Jesse, Justin quotes a number of those scriptures. Isaiah 53 about his being, by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. And the Lord caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. That's in Isaiah 53. So this is a way Justin says these ancient people, this has been an idea for a long, long time, older than the Greek myths. And that's really something that he spends a lot of time unpacking. All right. I need to jump to the next slide and then come back. Here's one example of what I'm talking about from chapter 53. He says, though we could bring forward many other prophecies, we forbear, judging these sufficient for the persuasion of those who have ears to hear and understand, and considering also that those persons are able to see that we do not make mere assertions without being able to produce proof. Notice this little dig, like those fables that are told of the so-called sons of Jupiter, right? Another thing he does, and I'll mention this, but we can't dwell on it, but he spends time criticizing the Greek myths. And he's saying, you're accusing Christians of doing these horrid things, and you're doing so on the basis of rumor. Show me the evidence, right? If there's evidence, they should be punished. But on the basis of rumor, you're willing to kill Christians. Look at all the stuff the gods do in the myths, right? This is horrible. And people celebrate the gods and have festivals to these gods and do all kinds of vile things in worship of these gods. You know, the inconsistency here, Justin is pointing out. Okay, back to where we were. That's my next point. The vileness of the Greco-Roman myths and their deities as bad actors. The one true God is nothing in character like them, but righteousness and justice and prudence, rationality, all that. So again, he's in this defense, he's creating a picture of Greco-Roman deities and the cultures that go along with it, and the Christian culture, and saying, you know, which of these is really better. Then he also spends time, I'm summarizing obviously, but the confusion sown by demons. And sometimes he says they mimic Christian practices, like he makes a reference to, and I don't remember the exact, he makes a reference to the crucifixion, and I don't remember the exact background there now, but, and we'll look at a scripture here in just a second in 1 Corinthians 10. Would you look that up, Joanne? 1 Corinthians 10:20. And this is an example of how Justin gets the idea, you might say, about demons working within the church, to mimic Christian ideas and practices, therefore to draw people away from the faith and sow all kinds of chaos. Okay, 1 Corinthians 10.
1 Corinthians 10, verse 20.
20, yes, I think it's 20.
No, but the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God. And I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons.
Right. So there Paul is calling pagan practices demonic. So when you engage in a ritual activity that may involve a libation, sort of mimicking the Lord's Supper, for example, you're not just participating in a pagan practice. You know, it's like, well, I'm a Christian and you're a this, right? No, you're actually engaging with the demonic. And that is what Paul says there. So again, all these things would take some thinking through and, you know, interpretation and all that, but that's where Justin roots this attack against pagan ideas. All right, now I would like to kind of slow down a little bit and look at some of these places that I asked you to read. See if I can open you back up so I can see you. Oops, not that way, this way. The mere application of a name. I did it once again. I didn't get my slide situated the way I should, so. Gonna have to do it this way. Speak up if you want to say something. The mere application of a name, and by name he does mean Christian. So all you have to do is label someone a Christian, and that's enough to get them in trouble. The mere application of a name, nothing is decided, either good or evil, apart from the actions implied in the name, and indeed, so far, at least as one may judge from the name we are accused of, we are most excellent people. And there's a little bit of a play on words here. So Christian, of course, means in Greek means little Christ. Christian means excellent. So there's one letter difference, I to E. And so there's a little play on words there. Carrying on in this same chapter, justice requires that you inquire into the life both of him who confesses and of him who denies, that by his deeds it may be apparent what kind of man each is. So there were people who had been Christian, but under pressure would deny Christ. They would renounce their faith. And that's what he's talking about here. So let their deeds show. So somebody who denies Christ, renounces Christ, gets to go free. And the irony, Justin is suggesting here, is that person is no Christian at all, right? And they are, by denouncing Christ, either being a Christian and denouncing, or sort of pretending to be a Christian, which is very unlikely. But the irony is in the getting off scot-free by demonstrating bad character. See what I'm trying to say? Somebody does a bad thing and they get to go free. The good people, the people with real character, are still under threat of death. That's what he's trying to point out, the irony of this process of accusation and trial and all that the Christians are having to go through. Now, this is, I've got all kinds of different sorts of questions about a lot of these statements, but could we just think out loud for a second about the impact of Christian character as being noticed and known and recognized? And I realize that for us in the West, with how much our culture has been Christianized over the years, even though we're now moving away from that kind of Christian background, but it's probably a little harder. But could we think about the significance of, we show our Christian faith by our character, by the way we are and the way we do? Anybody got any thoughts there?
I think it is hard to see now because of what you just said. And the last study that we had that basically pointed out that many of the good characteristics of societies these days came to us through Christianity. And so even people who are not Christians observe some things that, it's the water they swim in. And so it's harder now to see the difference in life and behavior of Christians and non-Christian.
Right.
Sometimes it's very clear, but there's a lot of people who do not confess Christ, that their lives don't look a lot different than
Right. They're
the
good.
people
They're
who
good
do.
people,
Mhm.
morally upright people,
Mhm.
etc. Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask a different question. And I know these, in one sense, I always think, man, that's an obvious question, but I am asking us to explore, to probe a little bit. So a two-part question. Is it the case that generally Christians in the United States we have lost our integrity? Any thoughts?
I would say not more than anybody else across the world.
Okay. All right. let me try asking it this way then. And I'll respond to Larry, but obviously anyone with an opinion. Is it the case then that it's really no more of a problem for Christians than it is for anybody?
What is no more of a problem?
This lack of integrity.
Oh.
Well, Steve, I think it's a matter of what your values are, and if part of your core belief is that integrity is important, then it matters more to you. If that is not part of your core belief, then it is not as important to you. But I think a lack of integrity, you see it in all walks of life, in all situations, and some successful people, some unsuccessful people, some, it's out there, but so are people of integrity, and it's not just Christian or Muslim or Jewish or atheist or anything like that. I think our Christianity calls upon us to be people of integrity, but it doesn't mean we're always good at doing that. So,
Right.
I think it's always important, but it may be more important if that's your core belief.
Yeah, and I guess in one sense, what I'm asking is, if we were to use Justin's bold, he's really challenging the emperor to look at Christians as a whole, to look at their character. And he's challenging the emperor to notice that, you're killing people that are some of your best people, if I could say it that way. Would that work today? Could Justin make the same case today?
I think that's what I was trying to say earlier. I don't think it's as clear today as it was then. Because you have wide parts of our culture who assume like certain, it's just not so clear as these are the pagan worshipers and these are the worshipers of Christ. Because even it just isn't as clear.
So I take that to be he could not make the case today.
Steve, I don't,
Go ahead, Linda, then we'll come to Sandy.
I think it would be pretty hard to make that case today, at least in some corners. There seems to be a large portion of the Christian community who think they are better than everyone else. And I think that's a problem.
Okay.
Steve, I'm not sure I'm 100% convinced he could make that argument then. Because I'm pretty sure that there were some pagans who treated everybody fairly and cared about other people, and there are probably some Christians who are real stinkers.
I'm sure that's the case. On balance.
Okay.
Well,
I mean, I don't know. I'm just.
I would have said the same thing that Sue just said prior to the study that we just did on what the
How
civilization.
Christianity says.
Yeah, because like when you study the Roman civilization in school, you hear all the cool things they came up with. You don't read about the tiers of the culture, the aristocrats and everyone else who just kind of existed to do their bidding, and the widespread slavery of anybody who got conquered became their slaves, and so I really did have to adjust my opinion, I guess, of the Roman civilization after that study. I thought it was more like America.
Right.
Okay, well, Jody, in all honesty, part of my problem is I didn't particularly completely buy into that book, so.
Okay.
It didn't change my mind.
Okay.
Okay, Sandy.
That made one difference.
Yeah.
Sandy.
Steve,
Come back to you, Linda, in just a second. Sandy?
I was just gonna address our present society and the
Okay.
culture.
Yeah.
You know, we've grown up in a feel good. If it feels good, do it. You know, take a pill, do this, you know, if you haven't been raised with a real strong Christian ethic, you know, that you want to follow Jesus and you want to follow the rules, then I think a lot of people think, oh, I'll just do that. You know, who would it hurt?
Yeah.
Well, okay, can I just give an example of maybe where it's a little clearer?
Okay.
A Marine on the subway in New York, risking his life, reputation, and everything for others. I don't know if he's Christian or not, but that's the kind of ethos
Yeah,
that we,
integrity, right?
and I think we can, you know, looking at the outliers is always a problem, but that makes the examples easier.
Yeah. Okay, Linda.
I'm not sure that Justin would consider many of our people who claim to be Christians. I'm not sure he would claim them.
That's a good point.
He
I
read
think
those
you're-
letters.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Well, one thing I think it would help to keep in mind, in this period of time still, this is true, the apostolic generation, still true, to leave a pagan environment to become a Christian was really a dramatic change. In worship practices, in what was considered acceptable behavior. The mere fact of becoming a Christian, if you're willing to stop doing some things, you know, worshiping the gods to make sure your crops grow and doing what you need to do to try to ensure that your crops will grow. And you know, we could go through a list of kind of values and practices and beliefs like that. So becoming a Christian then was quite you literally are changing culture, even though geographically you're not going anywhere, right? It would be much more visible to become a Christian then than it is now. Okay, chapter 6. One of the things that Christians are accused of is atheism. And I think most of us, probably all of us, understand that the reason they were accused of being atheist is because they would not acknowledge the Roman gods. So obviously they believe in God. They would not honor the Roman gods. And that fact alone, again, Sue, you're right. There were people who reneged on their faith, right? They did renounce. They did start out and not finish well. So, but most Christians actually stayed true to Christ. Therefore, that made them atheists in the eyes of the Roman state and culture. All right. Let me see if I can do this now. We're going to switch to chapter 6. Nope, wrong one. Sorry. Just bear with me, folks. Here it is over here. It moved on me. That's what happened. Chapter 6. Okay. Hence we are called atheists, and we confess that we are atheists so far as gods of this sort. Can you all see this? Okay. So far as gods of this sort are concerned, and the sort here are the Greco-Roman gods, but not with respect to the most true God, the Father of righteousness and temperance and other virtues, who is free from all impurity, but both him and the Son, who came forth from him and taught us these things, and the host of the other good angels who follow and are made like to him, and the prophetic spirit we worship and adore, knowing them in reason and truth. Okay, so we get this is a reference to the Trinity without the word Trinity coming into use yet. Okay, the word Trinity, or the Latin word Trinitas, really doesn't start getting used until about 50 years later, or 40 years later. And I wanted us to notice this kind of language to show that early, we see this in the New Testament, of course, but it continues on. We're going to look at Irenaeus next week. We'll see it there too. But there is this widespread sense that even though we don't have the full-blown doctrine of the Trinity worked out, you can see the language here. They worship the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, knowing them in reason and truth, and declaring without grudging to everyone who wishes to learn as we have been taught. You hear this kind of philosophical, he's really emphasizing teaching and learning all throughout this document. So there we have a picture of the Trinity in concept, even if not yet with a name. Okay, so let me go back to the other screen.
Hey, what does he mean by declaring without grudging? What's he saying there?
You broke up there, Linda. Can you try again?
The end of
What is, where he says, declaring without grudging, what is he referring to?
If anybody who's willing to learn, we are willing to share, right? We don't begrudge anyone the opportunity to learn. I think that's what he's saying. Yeah. All right. Oh, we just did that. Now let's go to chapter 10. We're going to look at the whole chapter again. If you have it in front of you, I invite you to turn there. Here's one of the ways he distinguishes the one true God, the God Christians worship, from pagan gods. And we're reading between the lines here. But we have received by tradition that God does not need the material offerings which men can give, seeing indeed that he himself is the provider of all things. Now, I want to stop here. I remember a friend of mine, this is years ago, she had traveled in I'm pretty sure it was India. And she remembers going by a Hindu temple, and you know, Hinduism has lots of gods to worship. But here's a statue of a god, and the worshipers with like offerings of rice and things like that are putting food in the mouth of the statue. That gives me a little glimpse of the sort of thing that Justin is criticizing here. God does not need people to feed him. God does not need stuff from us to live and thrive and to be pleased with us. Does not need the material offerings which men can give, seeing indeed that he himself is the provider of all things. Now, this seems like such a simple statement to us, but imagine he's addressing this statement to the emperor, who, by the way, this emperor, this is Antoninus, this is about 156 or so. So this is one of the emperors who begins to insist that people recognize him as a deity. Okay? But beyond even that, so Roma, the sort of Rome's national deity and all that, the job of the people is to keep the gods happy. And here Justin is really saying that whole thing is a sham. It's a waste of time. It's You know, to go back to Paul there, you're worshiping demons, not a real God. And so a statement like this, which we can read now just rather matter-of-factly, because we know God is the provider of all things. But imagine how foreign, how off-putting, how this would have sounded to the emperor. So going on, and we've been taught and are convinced and do believe that he accepts those only who imitate the excellences which reside in him, temperance and justice and philanthropy, and as many virtues as are peculiar to a God who is called by no proper name. So here we see Justin's picture of God as a God of righteousness, etc. Again, in contrast to the pagan deities. So this
is that works righteousness.
I thought the same thing.
Well, that's a good question. Is it works righteousness? What do you think?
Sure sounds like it. He accepts those only who imitate the excellences which reside in him.
Okay.
They have to be sanctified.
I think God is love, and I don't think love is work, so to speak. I mean, there's more to it than work. It's a way of behaving, a way of being.
Yeah, this is the book of James again, isn't it?
Right.
For those of you who went through that study. Yeah.
But he doesn't say anything here, and maybe he does somewhere else, of the atoning work of Christ.
That's a
Surely that was,
right.
okay, I was gonna say, surely that was part of his thinking.
Yeah.
But isn't he comparing the Roman god or emperor, whoever, who needs a bunch of stuff
Yeah.
with
The
Yahweh God,
Well-
this is a characteristic of,
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is, we're now on a topic again that's kind of classic Wesleyan / Methodist thinking. So if we can keep clear that to enter into a relationship with God, no works are needed. We have nothing meritorious to bring. But once I am in the faith, and this will show up later when we talk about baptism in Justin's document. Once I have been born again, once I am in the faith, I've trusted in Christ, I've gone through catechism, I believe, I'm baptized, and to go to James, the word has been implanted in me. Then it is expected that God's children will resemble God in character. So in temperance, justice, philanthropy. So we don't demonstrate those characteristics prior to becoming Christian because it's not really possible. Once with becoming a Christian, it's expected that Christians will begin to look like Christ and take on these characteristics. So I think Justin would say to us, cheap grace. Right? This is what Bonhoeffer said, cheap grace, right? A lot of what you call Christian ain't. Okay, so let's look at the whole chapter. So we'll go back. This is chapter 10, right? Is it chapter 10?
Yes.
It's not that long, and I wanted to read the whole thing. So I gave the first part. So let's start down about the 5th or 6th line there. And we have been taught that he in the beginning did of his goodness, for man's sake, create all things out of unformed matter. And if men by their works show themselves worthy of this his design, they are deemed worthy. And so we have received of reigning in company with him, being delivered from corruption and suffering. For as in the beginning he created us when we were not, so do we consider that in like manner, those who choose what is pleasing to him are, on account of their choice, deemed worthy of incorruption and of fellowship with him. So I'm just going to stop for a second and ask Larry if he wants to come back on the works righteousness thing.
It still sounds like it. Yeah, I mean, I know what he's trying to say, but
Right.
that was my initial reaction this afternoon when I was reading this for the first time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I think you're onto something there. So, we don't have to think that Justin is a perfectly groomed theologian. What we're seeing here is Justin the philosopher, and it does help us understand. I didn't say this at the beginning, but I can say it now, I think. So Justin tried a number of philosophical approaches before he was converted to the Christian faith. And to join a philosophical school was to enter into a set of spiritual practices, right? So there is quite a bit of doing here, and it sounds a lot like what he would have experienced in a philosophical school. But it's also the case that Christians or the church, as a kind of rival philosophical school, operated in a similar way. So we probably have here some, matters of caution, let's say. We need to take what he's saying very carefully and not let it go too far, or we do have works righteousness. We have the kind of, God he doesn't really accept us until we get our act together. And we certainly don't want to go that far. The other thing I'd like to point out in this chapter, for as in the beginning he created us when we were not, so do we consider that in like manner, those who choose what is pleasing to him. Jump down a couple of lines. That we may follow those things which please him, choosing them by means of the rational faculties. Do you hear the philosopher here? That he has himself endowed us with, that he persuades and leads us to faith. Okay? Jumping on down to the very end. For the restraint which human laws could not effect, the word, inasmuch as he is divine, would have effected, had not the wicked demons taken as their ally the lust of wickedness, etc., etc. Okay. So if I could say it this way, Justin is explaining the Christian faith the way he understands it philosophically. It's more philosophical than the way we now think about the faith. And there probably are some points of caution to watch there. All right. Jumping to chapter 61, moving on toward the end. Toward the end of the document, he starts getting into specific descriptions of what Christians do and worship and other things. Okay? So now we're talking about people joining the church, becoming Christians. I will also relate the manner in which we dedicated ourselves to God when we had been made new through Christ. Emphasis here is on the new birth, being made new. Lest if we omit this, we seem to be unfair in the explanation we are making. As many as are persuaded and believe that what we teach and say is true, and undertake to be able to live accordingly, are instructed to pray and to entreat God with fasting for the remission of their sins that are past, we praying and fasting with them. One gets the picture of, the whole church really rallying around the new believers. And again, if we think about the kind of hostile environment, this becomes even more real and important. So we pray and fast with them. Then they are brought by us where there is water and are regenerated in the same manner in which we were ourselves regenerated. How is that? By baptism. Again, there's, along with the works righteousness, we're probably not entirely on board. But it's, again, when we think about the kind of the context, for someone to accept these teachings, become a follower of Christ, and be willing to be baptized, coming up out of the water, new person, new life. We can sort of see the dramatic aspect of that moment in baptism. For in the name of God, the Father, and the Lord of the universe, and of our Savior, Jesus Christ, and of the Holy Spirit, they then receive the washing with water. So again, there's that Trinitarian kind of language. And he does quote John 3:3 about no one enters the kingdom of heaven without being born from above. So that new birth idea, the change in nature, the change in direction, the change in characteristics that Christians take on when they become followers of Jesus, that is what is emphasized here. And I do think I think it's good for us to kind of dwell there more than we do. We tend to dwell on the faith side and forgiveness, right? We're in a new relationship with God, which that's very biblical and it's good. We tend to dwell there though. We kind of shy away from this, oh, I'm becoming a different person because the Spirit of God now is working in me in a certain way. The new birth idea and the change that occurs in us, in our character, we're a little bit more hesitant about that. So I think Justin could push us a bit on this point. Any thoughts about that?
I have a question.
Yep.
So in Justin's mind, I'm asking you to try to get there. When is a person a Christian? Is it when they say they believe, or is it when they are regenerated?
Well, I think, and obviously I'm no expert on Justin, but I think this is generally the case. Even today, you start exploring this kind of question, it's pretty hard to pin down the moment, right? That very moment. I think what Justin would say is that baptism is really the culminating experience, that there is something when you receive baptism. Once again, baptism today, we're going to do a baptism Sunday. It doesn't carry the potential cost that it carried then. So being baptized was really, forgive the pun, a watershed moment, right? But everything leading up to that, learning, believing, learning some more, learning the disciplines of the faith. Is a person already a Christian? Most likely. But that, being baptized, that was the sign that you're really crossing over into a new life.
I mean, maybe that's not something we believe or practice in Methodism, but that is the idea that I grew up in.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
You're not really a Christian until you're baptized.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he's going there, but
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know.
No, I thought of that too as I was reading this, it sounds like baptismal regeneration. But I think if pressed, he would say, no, there's more going on than it's that whole process of regeneration spreads out over a number of different kinds of experiences. Okay, let me press on, and I think we won't look at the whole chapter here because I know I'm out of time. But now we're talking about the Lord's Supper. But we, after we have thus washed him who has been convinced and has assented to our teaching, notice that kind of philosophical tone again. Bring him to the place where those who are called brethren are assembled. Having ended the prayers, we salute one another with a kiss. There is then brought to the president of the brethren bread and a cup of wine mixed with water. The rest of that chapter spells out a description of what actually happens in the communion service. And I just think it's pretty neat that it is what we do.
Mhm.
It's the same what we do when we celebrate Holy Communion here 1,600 years, no, 1,800 and more years later. Now, why does he include a description of the Eucharist? Well, one of the reasons he does is because Christians were accused of stealing and killing little children and eating them.
Goodness.
And so Justin is explaining what Christians do when they partake of the Lord's body and blood. And this food is called Eucharistia, of which no one is allowed to partake but the man who believes that the things which we teach are true, and who has been washed with the washing that is for the remission of sins and unto regeneration, and who is so living as Christ has enjoined. Again, we won't look at the whole chapter, but not everyone gets to come to communion.
It's not an open table.
Amen.
No, it's not. You need to be a believer and you need to be baptized. Now, I admit to you, I think there's real disagreement among United Methodists about this. The idea of open table has become kind of absolutized. You know, anybody can come regardless, right? And I don't think it's always been that way, even in United Methodism. When I was in seminary in the 80s, we talked about these things, and my understanding when I was ordained is that the table is open to anyone who's been baptized, right? So children are welcome, but I do think we've shifted a little bit over the years to expand it a little bit more. But here it's very clear. You got to be a baptized believer to share in Holy Communion. And in fact, in those days, the seekers, the converts, the people not yet baptized often would be dismissed from the worship service at that point, and then the baptized believers would then celebrate the sacrament. And that added a little bit to the mystery, and it added probably a little bit to the suspicion and the rumors. Okay, I know I'm out of time, but let's look at the whole chapter. So let me do it one more time. Again, we can see our church in the early church, which is partly why we're doing this. Okay, bear me in. And we afterwards continually remind each other of these things, and the wealthy among us help the needy, and we always keep together. And for all things wherewith we are supplied, we bless the maker of all through his Son, Jesus Christ, and through the Holy Ghost. There's that Trinitarian formula again. And on the day called Sunday, all who live in cities or in the country gather together to one place. And the memoirs of the apostles. What's that?
Gospels.
The letters and the Gospels.
What we might call it the New Testament, you know, now. But yeah, the Gospels, absolutely. Memoirs of the apostles, that's the most direct reference. Or the writings of the prophets, there we have the Old Testament, are read as long as time permits. Then when the reader has ceased, the president verbally instructs and exhorts to the imitation of these good things. Then we all rise together and pray. As we said before, when our prayers ended, bread and wine and water are brought, and the president in like manner offers prayers and thanksgiving according to his ability. Remember that, folks. According to our limited ability. And the people assent, saying, Amen. There's a distribution to each, a participation of that over which thanks has been given. And to those who are absent, a portion is sent by the deacons. So sharing in the Lord's Supper beyond that moment. And those who are well-to-do and willing give what each thinks fit. And what is collected is deposited with the president. So there's the offering, who succors the orphans and the widows, and those who through sickness or any other cause are in want, and those who are in bonds, and the stranger sojourning among us, and in a word takes care of all who are in need, and so on. Now again, we get this picture. This would have been so strange if you are a stranger in need, the Christians would take you in. This is where, when we think of the integrity of the church, we think about these kinds of things. It would have been so bizarre from a worldly pagan point of view, to take in somebody you didn't even know, to care for somebody who wasn't a member of your family or your social class or whatever, that would have been really, really weird. And here, Justin describes it as a normal practice of the church. It's just part of the way we worship. What we collect in the offering for worship is more or less immediately put to use to help those in need. So it would have seemed really strange from the outside that Christians would do that. And then you add in martyrdom. These Christians are not afraid to die. What is it? What kind of God are they worshiping? You can imagine the sort of questions that would come up. Justin ends his apology with a direct kind of prophetic word to the emperor about, if you kill these people unjustly, God will judge you. You will not escape judgment. This is around 156 when he wrote this apology. 9 years later, he was beheaded in Rome as a Christian. He would not renounce. So, all right, there you have it. Now, I know we gotta quit, but if you're willing, maybe email me or text me or something and tell me, what was it like for you to read Justin Martyr?
A lot
So-
easier.
Next week, it's gonna be tougher. We're gonna read something from Irenaeus and his document, his treatise against heresies. So we're gonna take a look at some of what's going on in the church that is challenging Orthodox theology. So we'll get to that next week and I'll send you the link. Okay, friends,